Hi, I'm Will the Gamer, and welcome to my first episode of Project Perfect MMO. Today I wanted to start off with a lore video, because it's relevant to basically everything else that pertains to this world that I'm building, and that lore is of mana. One thing that I've really never liked about most books, fantasy novels, and video games is that they don't really explain how mana works, or how magic works. It's basically just a thing you're supposed to believe exists. It's generally not given any laws or rules to abide by other than in most video games you have a maximum amount and you've got to kind of pool your resources and figure out how you're going to use it best. So I decided to create lore around mana so that I could have a functioning story around magic. So what is mana in my universe? Well, it can be best described as latent energy. Mana exists all around everything. It is everything that is not something. However, by itself, mana does not do anything. You could be swimming in an ocean of mana, and if you did not know how to control it, it would be useless to you. That is, unless you happen to have an affinity for mana. Now, there are people and creatures within my lore and world that do have an affinity for mana. In fact, most creatures on this world have an affinity for mana, although some do not. The greater a affinity for mana a person or creature has, the more drastic their changes can be. So let's say you're a lizard. Well, lizards aren't particularly intelligent. However, they do have natural survival instincts. The biggest and the strongest are the ones that will survive. Or maybe you're the lizard that wants to be the stealthiest, and so you want to have a perfect set of camouflage. Well, if you just so happen to have an affinity for mana, you will subconsciously, just based on your basic desires, be able to manipulate it. That means that the lizard that wants to get bigger is going to get bigger, and the lizard that wants to get stealthier is going to get stealthier. Now, these creatures aren't intelligent enough to know what they're doing, and it may take many, many generations before, one actually has an affinity for mana, and two, they have the desire to be different in some way. However, this is how I use mana to explain the rapid and outlandish evolution of the creatures within my lore, because there are quite a few creatures in my lore that are just by natural evolution would be physically impossible or just wouldn't make sense. But if you put mana into the mix and you realize that mana can rapidly evolve creatures based on their own preferences without them even realizing it, then you can go crazy with evolution. However, this is just how mana affects creatures that don't have the intelligence to manipulate it. However, higher beings of intelligence are perfectly capable of manipulating it, and magic has a very specific way that it works in my universe. All of the sentient races in my universe all have a natural affinity for mana. However, those that call themselves mages are of a much higher affinity for mana than regular just warriors and soldiers. So remember, mana affinity is genetic. That means that only certain people will have it, and only certain people will be able to process it at a higher level. However, since mana affinity is connected directly to genetics, people, even in the more intelligent species, the sentient species, breed specifically for mana affinity. This comes into play later with the noble houses that, they only breed within other noble houses because, well, they want to keep the mana affinity strong. However, I'll discuss that in a culture video. As I said, mana is all around you. It is everything that doesn't exist. It's between all the air molecules, it's between all the space, it's everything that isn't a thing. Thus, those who have an affinity for mana can absorb mana from the surrounding area and store it within their body for usage at later times. However, it would take an immense amount of concentration for even the best mages to, say, make a fireball. Thus, for a mage to cast a spell, such as a fireball, they have to cover themselves in tattoos. These runic tattoos are etched into the skin using a very specific type of ink that manipulates mana and focuses it in a way that allows them to channel mana through them into something else. I know that was a horrible explanation, but basically what it does is it turns their bodies into gates. However, if these gates were to always be open, you would just basically be shooting fire out of your hands until you run out of mana. Thus, mages train to use words to activate these gates. If you, say, had a tattoo around your throat and your specific spell word was Fus Ro Da, and that was just how you used Unrelenting Force, well then that's how you would use Unrelenting Force. However, this limits mages to using however much skin they can cover with these specific tattoos, and thus specific mages are used for specific things. This is what I call classes. So you're going to have your, standard priest, you're going to have your, fire mage, your pyromancer, your cryomancer, your geomancer, you're going to have your shamans, all kinds of classes. I have a whole list of classes that I'll go over in probably my next video. But basically there's a bunch of different classifications of mage, all because they only have so much space on their body to use, and they're going to use it based culturally in different ways, and they're going to use it for whatever they see fit, however best they can use it in their specific location. This answers the question of, well, why don't mages just use all magic? Why don't they just study every kind of magic? It's literally because they can't. That was always one of my gripes if, let's say, I was playing World of Warcraft, because it never really explains how mana is used to my knowledge, and it's always just seemed really weird that, I could be a fire mage, but why am I not also an ice mage or an arcane mage? And why am I not using warlock spells too? If I could use fear and all kinds of ice CC moves and, all my fire moves also, why wouldn't I just use all of them? It doesn't make any sense for me to just use one. So anyways, let's review the basics of mana. Mana itself does nothing without being used. Creatures that have an affinity for mana can manipulate it even if only subconsciously. Those with higher affinities for mana can manipulate it at will. However, the most effective way of manipulating it would be to use spell tattoos. Spell tattoos use a specific type of ink that allows you to manipulate mana in a very specific way, which is activated using spell commands which you yourself set. And since your body can only hold so many tattoos in order to make it convenient for you to use spells, you can only set a few, which is how you define classes within the game. Thus, we have gone over the basics of mana. During other lore videos and other videos about certain classes, I'll probably go over more specific details of mana manipulation and other effects that they might have on creatures. But for now, I think this is a good start, and it gives you kind of a good idea as to where I'll be going from here on out with mana. So that's where I'm going to wrap it up. That's all for my first video. Let me know what you thought. Give me any comments, and tell me what you think, or how you would like to see mana work. Anyhow, this is Will the Gamer, and I'm out.